Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Alicia Gabidon, and I am an adult services librarian with Vaughan Public Libraries. Before we start the formal program, I would like to share a few housekeeping notes. To minimize interruptions, participants will be set to mute and videos will be turned off. For accessibility, we have turned on the live transcript feature. During the presentation, there will be a question and answer period during and following the presentation. So that means that questions can be sent in at any time, and the presenter will also be asking questions. Tonight's lecture is being recorded and will be made available on VPL's YouTube channel. On behalf of Vaughan Public Libraries, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that our libraries were built upon the territory and the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation per the Toronto Purchase Agreement, or Treaty 13. We also recognize we are situated in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee, who occupied this land before the arrival of European settlers. The city of Vaughan is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge their contributions to the life and prosperity of this land. As representatives of the people of the city of Vaughan, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. This evening, I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Nneka MacGregor, LLB, a co-founder and executive director of Women's Center for Social Justice, WomenatthecentrE. WomenatthecentrE is a nonprofit organization created by and for women survivors of gender-based violence globally. Nneka is an advocate who works with governments and organizations to transform lives and build violence-free communities. Please join me in giving Nneka MacGregor a very warm welcome. I hand it over to you, Nneka.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Yeah, I don't know where to begin. I'm just very, very grateful, very, very grateful for this opportunity to share space with all of you wonderful people this evening to talk about a subject matter that's obviously very, very close to my heart, very, very important. But I just wanted to show profound gratitude to Alicia and her team at Vaughan Public Library for, having the foresight and the wisdom to engage in this conversation. I do have a slide deck that I have prepared, so let me just open that up because I'm the PowerPoint queen, as my team knows. Can you all see this? Can I get a thumbs up? Alicia, can you see it? Oh, brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to play it from the beginning. All right, so we're going to have a series of conversations on social inclusion, and the focus is on violence against women. And to tell you that I don't have much of a life apart from the work, I spend far too much time on PowerPoint slide decks making things like this happen and animation like that happen. But anyway. My name is Nneka MacGregor, as Alicia said, and I am the co-founder. And it's funny because I understand why people say Women at the Center E, because the E is so big, but it's just Women at the Center, and was a marketing ploy that we came up with at the very beginning of the organization to distinguish us from other organizations. So we squashed the word as one, Women at the Center, and then the W and the E being capitalized so that it speaks to the fact that we are the women at the center of this issue. So it's just Women at the Center. That was a lovely land acknowledgement, Alicia, that you did. But I also just want to add that we have my team, my staff, and our placement students. We go around making sure that when we do our land acknowledgements, that it really is coming from our heart. I won't repeat what Alicia said, because I too am I'm in Takaronto. But I want to emphasize that as an uninvited guest on Indigenous land, I take my work seriously. My work of standing in solidarity especially with Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. So a lot of the work that I personally do, a lot of my personal advocacy and activism As much as it centers Black women, Black girls, and Black gender diverse peoples, it equally centers Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people as my way of paying rent for living on their land. And part of that work is also calling everybody who is not Indigenous into the space and asking, actually demanding, that everybody who's not Indigenous shows solidarity with Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, especially by calling on the government to implement the 231 imperative changes that the Native Women's Association of Canada through their national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I just wanted to start off there, let everybody know where I'm coming from, in the sense that I am here in unequivocal, unabashed, unapologetic support for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. This is me about 4 years ago. So this is a very old picture. I still look good, I know, but my hair is slightly different. And I wanted to really contextualize why I do this work and to let people get a better sense of who I am and the sort of the trajectory, the journey that brought me into this space and into your living rooms or kitchens or wherever you are this evening. I'm a mother, I'm a sister, and I'm an aunt. I'm a friend to many. I'm an employer, I'm a mentor. And I usually actually lead with, either I lead with I'm a mother or I lead with I'm a survivor. And I think that's really, really important, the survivor bit, because the journey that I went through, I was on to get me to a stage where I can actually state that I'm a survivor without any shame, without guilt, without fear, was a difficult one. And I feel that the ability to stand in my survivorhood and be showing that I'm thriving is really a testament, right, to the courage of women, trans, gender diverse survivors who have survived, because knowing that many, many, many more have not survived, have actually had their lives taken by other individuals in their lives, in their families. So obviously I'm a woman, and means that I'm a cisgendered woman, a Black cisgendered woman, meaning that I acknowledge I am the person that I was designated at birth. So I was designated as a girl at birth, and I identify as a girl. But even in all of that, I acknowledge that I do have privilege. I do have privilege in my role as the executive director of the organization. I have privilege because of my education. I have privilege because of sort of the experiences that I've had. But again, I use those privileges as a way to disrupt and reconstruct society in a way that I feel is actually going to be much more beneficial and healing to the world. I see myself as an accomplice to other marginalized communities who are experiencing disproportionate levels of violence, and especially Black trans women and girls, Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, and with women and girls who are living with disabilities. Because understanding that the way the system has been set up to discriminate and to keep certain populations down at the expense of others is something that is actually harmful for everybody, including the oppressor. And so I use my position and my power, as I said, to disrupt and uproot. I walk in this work, and I was telling this to Alicia before we jumped started letting everybody else in. I walk in this work with, I call it an unbreakable faith in human capacity for kindness, compassion, empathy, and love. And I saw my lovely colleague, Sonia Boyce, is on the call. Sonia talks about doing the work as heart work, right? It's hard work, but it's also heart work, because you do it out of a sense of love and a sense of compassion, because you want to change the world so that it is safe for everybody. I just wanted to acknowledge that. I also do the work because I have 3 people in my life who I call my 3 wishes. And I can say that without them, literally and figuratively, I wouldn't be here, because of the last time I was experiencing the violence was on Mother's Day in 2003. And it was actually my children, especially my eldest, who saved my life. And so I want to start by showing you, oh, there goes the dog, showing you my first wish, my beautiful girl, Ali, who is going to make me a grandmother in January. So I'm especially thankful to her. It's my daughter, Ali, who's living in Hong Kong with her husband. My second wish is my beautiful boy, my sunshine, Alexander, who just got married in July to his wonderful wife, Ellen. And again, my son is an example of how the world of being male in the world can actually be filled with compassion and empathy and, you know, kindness, because my sunshine, Alexander, is the embodiment of what I think male kindness and allyship and compassion is. And look at his beautiful face. And then my baby, Christiana, who is living in the States, just finished her master's in architecture. These three people are the reasons why I get out of bed. These three people are the reasons why even when the work is hard, I persist. I continue and I persist, because I want the world to be better for them. I don't want a world where my daughters experience what I experienced and what so many survivors have gone through. I don't want a world where my son is that guy, right? That guy who is violent, who is abusive, who is oppressive to not just the women in his life, but to his community. So I do this work because of my three wishes. And so everything that I'm saying and I'm doing is contextualized because I love my babies and I love the people who have sort of supported me, not just when I was going through the violence, but my staff. And I see many. I just saw Diamond logged on. I saw Nicole, saw Jessica, Nikki, all of the people that I get to work with who fill me with so much hope and so much gratitude. They are all part of my wishes. And I just wanted everybody to acknowledge that there are people in this world who are amazing, who want to make the world a better place. And we just need to make sure that we are in community with them. The cat and the dog have decided that this is the time they're going to fight. So please, if Basil starts barking, just ignore. There he goes. Just ignore him. Basil, hold on 1 second. I'm going to mute. Hold on 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So on Friday is the beginning of the 16 days of activism around gender-based violence. And I wanted to position this talk, contextualize this talk in that space, right? In the space of the 16 days of activism, but understanding that the work that we do and many other activists in the gender-based violence against women space, that we do this work 365 days of the year, but society in general, globally, reserves these 16 days to actively engage in conversation. So we're going to use this opportunity to actively engage. But I wanted to, again, contextualize the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, that November 25th is the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. December 6th, in the Canadian context, is National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women that started as a result of the Montreal Massacre. And then December 10th is Human Rights Day. So all of this advocacy and activism around eliminating violence against women, taking action and embedding and centering human rights, women's rights, gender diverse people's rights, our human rights, is really sort of the backdrop to all of this. So the first question that I'm asking all of you, because this is a conversation, it's not Nneka's lecture, it's a conversation. The first question that I'm posing to all of you is, what do you think is or are the reasons why violence occurs? So I'm going to invite you all to type away in the chat box, and Alicia will be able to read some of your responses out. So take a few seconds, type away. Why do you think violence against women, girls, and gender diverse people happens? So I'm actually going to time it and give you like a minute. And whilst that's happening, I'm going to drink some water. Alicia, Oh, I can see the chats. Okay, good. Let me see the chat. White supremacy. Thank you, Kelsey, showing up in the room. Who else? Unequal distribution of power. Jess D, my girl. Darlene, excellent control. Beautiful. Beautiful. Keep typing and we'll continue the presentation, but patriarchy. Thank you, Stephanie.
Rape culture.
Yep, exactly. So I wanted to, I know that the conversation is around violence against women, but I wanted to have a quick conversation around the use of language, right? And the change in sort of direction away from violence against women to a more broad and all-encompassing gender-based violence. Violence against women, whilst we recognize that it's overwhelmingly targeting women, but understanding that also people who are gender non-binary, trans women, queer, individuals on the gender spectrum are also targets of this type of violence. And I'm going to talk about it as male perpetrated violence because again, I have receipts, I have the stats to prove that it is gendered and that it is male perpetrated violence against predominantly other genders. And it's important to recognize the impacts of other systemic discriminations in this circle, in this arena. So for example, race, gender identity, ability, poverty, all of these have a really, really deep impact, deep and lasting impact on the lives of individuals who are experiencing gender-based violence. And it's important, as I'm saying, to recognize who the targets of this type of intersection are. And they're overwhelmingly understanding that there is the degree and the severity of injuries that these populations experience are very, very different from the types of violence and the injuries that men who are subject to violence by their intimate partners or by women, the degree of injury and the severity of injuries that men generally sustain is not as high or as severe as when women and gender diverse individuals are targets of violence. And we cannot have this conversation about, intersecting identities without mentioning my girl crush, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who formulated the intersectionality framework. And that intersectionality is really looking at the differential impacts on certain communities of violence. So whilst Black women, white women, South Asian women as a class, as a group, experience violence, but there is a difference in the degree and the scope and the extent and the system's responses. I am so sorry. And the system's responses when the individual, Basil, dude, when the individual is Black, Indigenous, trans, gender diverse, or an individual living with a disability. So understanding how intersectionality and your identity impacts the way that you are able to, number one, be perceived by the systems, secondly, receive supports from the systems, and thirdly, generally heal from such violence is an important factor that needs to be considered. And so when I talk about, I've moved away from violence against women, and my organization and many in the sector now use language of gender-based violence, GBV. To understand what it is, I sort of framed it in this way. It's systemically rooted violence. It's systemic in the sense that all the systems that play in our lives, from the criminal legal system, education, health, all of this immigration, have violence embedded in them, right? It's systemically rooted, and it's enacted by persons and systems on individuals and collectives in relation to their gender identity, their gender expression, or their perceived gender. I think that it's also important, critically important, to note that this type of gender-based violence has no social, economic, geographic, age, or other restrictions, which means that being rich doesn't make you immune from this type of violence. Living in urban communities doesn't make you immune from this type of violence. Coming from a particular culture doesn't make you more predisposed to be a target or less likely to be a target. This type of violence attacks everybody, attacks anybody and everybody. And so people who have had the tendency in the past of thinking, well, it can't happen to, and then insert whatever, rich women. It does happen to rich women. It can't happen to white women. It happens to white women. It can't happen to women who society deems to be beautiful. It happens to women. Rihanna, stunning. It happened to Rihanna. So it knows no social, economic, geographic, age, or other restrictions. So how do we know, again, that it is gendered? I sit on the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability with my other girl crush, Dr. Myrna Dawson, who's out of the University of Guelph, criminology. And every year, the members of the Femicide Observatory work to publicize the killings of women and girls and two-spirit and gender diverse people because they are women and girls, etc. And it's called the Femicide Observatory because the word femicide is specifically talking about the killings of women because they are women. So looking at our last report in 2021, you'll see that 173 women and girls were violently killed in Canada. And when I say it is gendered, this is the reason. When you look at in instances where the accused killer was identified, 90%, almost 9 out of 10 of the individuals who killed these women were male. So it isn't a 50-50. Some women kill, 50% of those who were killed are men, 50% are women, 50% of it isn't. Overwhelmingly, right, 149 instances where the perpetrator was identified. In 89% of the instances, the perpetrator was male identified. So you cannot argue that this is not a gendered issue. You cannot argue. And I urge everybody, when you have a minute, to go and look at the Canadian Femicide Observatory's website and look. It actually breaks down by provinces, how many women, girls were killed in each province. And so when people say this is not gendered because it happened, women kill men as well. Yes, women do kill men as well. But these are the types of data that we're working with, which is unequivocal, right? You can't argue with this. And also, whilst we're on this, I also sit on the Ontario Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, which looks at the killings in the intimate domestic violence sphere, where there has been a killing in the context of family violence. And again, in my work on the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, overwhelmingly, 9 times out of 10, the perpetrator is a man, the victim is a woman or woman identified. So we know that this is a gendered problem because of this type of independent, verifiable facts. I want to talk very quickly about the different types of gender-based violence. And in the olden days, back in the day, it was called domestic violence. It was also called spousal assault, family violence. Now the common, most often used language that the sector gravitates towards is either intimate partner violence or interpersonal violence. And as I said in the previous slide, this type of violence does occur in same-sex relationships. And we know that women can be abusive to their male partners. However, overwhelming evidence, as I showed before, that abuse and violence are perpetrated by men against their female current or ex-partners. Therefore, it is a gendered issue. My focus when I do these presentations is really focused on heterosexual relationships, but again, understanding that it does happen in same-sex relationships. Very quickly, the type of intimate partner violence that we're talking about here is, hold on one second, is any use of physical, verbal, sexual force actual or threatened coercive control in an intimate relationship. And I do have a slide that actually breaks it down a little bit more. And I think it was Stephanie in the chat that said it's about power and control. It is about power. It is about control. It's a pattern of assaultive controlling behavior. And that controlling behavior is used to intimidate, humiliate, frighten the partner, and to make them feel completely powerless. And it's important also to note that, again, the Canadian Femicide Observatory in 2029, we determined that a woman is murdered every 2.5 days in Canada. And I want everybody to sit with that for a second. Every 2.5 days, a woman loses her life, oftentimes at the hands of somebody who is supposed to be somebody who loves them, oftentimes in a space that they're supposed to be safe in, which is their home, and oftentimes under circumstances where society at large has, sort of shifted, turned a blind eye to what's happening. And this is one of the, when I talk about disrupting and reconstructing, this is one of the things that we need to be doing better, is to be shining a light on this type of violence and making people understand that it isn't a private matter, it is a public health concern. And as such, every member of the public, every single one of us, has a vested interest in making sure that these types of horrific statistics are no longer, the standard or the norm or the expected. It is horrific. And when you think about the ripple effects, a woman is killed, the impact on her family, on her friends, on the community is a lasting legacy of trauma that's left behind. And all of us are the poorer for every loss, for every killing, every femicide that happens in our community. And I also want to stress that gender-based violence is universal and it impacts everybody, right? Everybody. It impacts families, communities, societies, impacts our values, impacts the policies and the practices that we live by. I want to share some stats and facts. This is really, really important. Some of it is a little bit old, but some of it is quite recent. $7.4 billion, $7.4 billion is the estimated total economic impact of spousal violence in Canada each year. This is from research in 2011. Where they were looking at the costs associated with intimate partner violence. $7.4 billion. And if you think about what we could do as a country with $7.4 billion, improving healthcare, improving access to education, the horrendous student debt that we have, there's so much more that can be used with that type of money, as opposed to spending it on this type of violence that is totally, totally preventable. This is also important, 2021. 50% of all women in Canada will have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. And again, think about that. If you are one of the few women who have luckily been exempt from this type of violence, you know somebody who has experienced either physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. I actually think that these numbers are higher. I honestly believe that the numbers are higher. The challenge is that a lot of women don't disclose. Again, because we're going to talk about that later on, because of shame and blaming. 67% of all Canadians say that they personally know at least one woman who has been sexually or physically assaulted. This is Angus Reid, dating back in 2012. 1.2 million women in Canada reported being victims of spousal violence. This is 2011 again. 40% of violent crimes, this is horrific. 40% of violent crimes in Canada that was reported to police was committed against women by a current or former partner. 40%. Stats from 2010. And then 49% of all solved homicides were women killed by their intimate partners. I'm so sorry. Oh, Basil. He's not listening. This is the time. 49% of all solved homicides were of women who were killed by their intimate partners. Almost 50% were women who were killed by their intimate partners. So what's the issue? Violence against women, especially intimate partner violence and sexual violence, is a major public health and human rights violation. It is. And anybody who doesn't understand it or see it in that way, you're not paying attention. People are not paying attention. The World Health Organization published a report in 2021 that estimated that 1 in 3, 30% of women worldwide have been subjected to either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 women. So again, if it's not you, I can guarantee you know somebody. I wanted to talk very quickly again, just to go back to the word femicide, because this is the language that we're trying to get into the Canada Criminal Code. And we're working with, of all people, London, Ontario Police and their board to try and get femicide acknowledged in the criminal code. And the reason why we want femicide to be acknowledged as opposed to the general term homicide is, again, to showcase how severe and how serious the killings of women, because they are women, are in the Canadian context. And we believe that by having it enacted in legislation is a way to shine a light and to continue the conversation and to actually start making practical, proactive steps, government to make practical, proactive steps about eradicating it. Other types of violence, physical abuse, including slapping, hitting, punching, pushing, shoving, strangling, hitting with any kind of weapon or object. It includes rape, sexual assault. It includes financial and economic control. It includes harming family pets. And then there is a new term, not necessarily new, but relatively new term, called coercive control, which encompasses verbal, degrading, humiliating language and verbal abuse, emotional, psychological, threatening language, isolation and confinement, withdrawal of emotional and financial support, attempting to control or cut off friends or families, escalating arguments for no reason, and increased hostility towards other friends. And that all of that falls under coercive control. And then there's physically harming of children as a way of harming the mother, right? Every mother will tell you that when their child hurts, you bleed, you hurt. And perpetrators of violence often know that to harm the child is the quickest way to do lasting damage on the mother, which is why for a lot of the men who have gone on to kill, they will oftentimes kill just the child and leave the mother with that loss. So threatening the children is another form of the violence, and then also ignoring the welfare of the children. So second question, and I'm hoping more of you will jump on the chat. Why do you think women don't leave? Just seeing all of this stuff that, we just introduced, why do you think women stay?
Because of the children, finance, fear, insecurity, nowhere to go. It's not safe to, because when we try, they threaten us.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Continue typing in there. Very complex layers. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So I want to share something with everybody. There was a fellow by the name of Brian Vallée who passed away. He was a Canadian journalist, and he wrote a book called The War on Women. And this book, if you haven't read it, I would urge everybody to go buy it. And if you can't buy it, get somebody to buy it for you as an end of year present. So Brian Vallée wrote a book called The War on Women, where he was conducting a comparison between soldiers in the United States and soldiers in Canada, and police officers in the United States and police officers in Canada. and how many were killed in the line of duty. And then he later compared them to women in intimate partner violence. But let's start with soldiers in the United States and Canada. And he did this comparison took the data from 2000 to 2006. So for those 7 years, over that 7-year period, he found that 2,697 soldiers in the States died. And it was mainly, obviously, from the war in Iraq and war in Afghanistan. And in Canada, there were 44, again, in Afghanistan. 6 were in Canada, 6 were killed by friendly fire and 4 killed in accidents. So all of that were 44 who died. In the US, there were 726 who died accidental, i.e. non-hostile deaths. In the same period, with police, there were 611 who were, the term is feloniously killed in the line of duty. And then there were 544 who died on the job, either from heart attacks of death by suicide. And in the Canadian context, there were 16 who died in the line of duty, and 41 died, including 16 from car accidents, aircraft accidents, and motorcycle accidents. So that brought a total from 2000 to 2006 of 4,588 in the States, and a total of 101 in Canada. And then he also found data on how many were wounded. There were 24,000 wounded in Iraq, from Iraq and Afghanistan, and then there were 80 in the Canadian context from Afghanistan. So remember that total: 4,588 in the US and 101 in Canada. He then looked at the killings of women, right, in the same period in the United States. And the number he came up with was over 8,000. Over 8,000 women were killed by an intimate partner, a current or former intimate partner, and estimated that it's between 1,200 to 1,300 women in the States a year are killed in the context of an intimate partner relationship. And in Canada, at the time, there were estimates of around about 500. And it doesn't include, I wanted to mention this, that he did not include the 600 at the time missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. So he didn't factor them in. And again, we know that the numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is far, far higher than 600. So you compare the 4,500 plus of soldiers who went into the profession and police officers who went into the profession knowing that there was a risk of death as a result of their work, compared to the 8,000 women in the US, 500 women in Canada, who went into a relationship not expecting death as an outcome, not expecting to be murdered as a result of entering into a relationship. 8,000 plus women in the US, 500 plus women minimum in Canada who were stalked, raped, beaten, tortured, shot, stabbed, strangled, mutilated, burned, and murdered. So when I talk about this as a systemic issue, nobody, apart from Brian Vallée, has presented the data in such a stark way. And when I started using his work in my presentations, I used to talk about there's a highway of heroes that we have in Ontario, which is like the 401, right? It's called the Highway of Heroes, to commemorate soldiers who have given their lives protecting the country in war. And whilst I genuinely feel for their families and their loved ones who miss them, women, there is no highway of heroes for women who have been murdered and who didn't enter into the space with the possibility that they would lose their lives, that their lives will be taken from them. And so I talk about the systemic nature of this gendered violence. the systemic nature where women's experiences, regardless of how you identify, Black, Indigenous, white, women's experiences are erased. Women, gender diverse, two-spirit people's experiences are erased from the systems that prop up society. And instead, as somebody mentioned in their answer, it's patriarchy that is centered, right? The male gaze, what is important to men. And again, contextualizing it by understanding that it was only recently where women were no longer property. Only recently, turn of the century. And even then, Black women and Indigenous women were still, even when white women were given rights to vote, etc., Black women and Indigenous women for decades and decades after were treated still as non-citizens, not human. And so this systemic embedding of misogyny and misogynoir, and I'll talk about that in a few slides, anti-women, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous hatred is part of the reason why this type of violence continues to persist, and part of the reason why systems seem incapable of doing anything to eradicate it. And we know that there are so many things that can be done. And this is why we're doing this work. So I coined the term taking incremental liberties. And I coined that term after we Women at the Centre, and we're quite known for our court watch. We conduct a series of monitoring of the specialized domestic violence courts. And after our very first one in 2010, and we did another one in 2015, then another one in 2016, and we're doing a family court watch one, which is, I'll talk about that again later on. But after the court watches, the domestic violence, specialized domestic violence court watches that we did, some things became apparent. It became so obvious that the system is so broken. The system that we are operating under is so flawed, it is so broken that we can't fix it by tinkering. We can't, move things around. You need to honestly blow the whole thing up. I'm not trying to be violent, but we need to disrupt and dismantle it and reconstruct it. And the taking incremental liberties comes from an understanding as to why perpetrators continue to do what they do. And it's because there is a lack of accountability. So what does taking incremental liberties look like? First of all, she won't report, right? So she is raped, she is beaten, and she doesn't want to report. She doesn't want to report because the system is flawed. The system is set up for her to fail. So women have had this underground railroad of communication where we tell each other our experiences. And when my experience has been so traumatizing and traumatic that it is often worse than the rape or the assault that I experienced, and I'm telling other women, there's no inducement, there's no encouragement for another woman to say, yep, sign me up, I'm going to report. So women won't report because the system is stacked against us. When she does report, she now faces the unfounded allegations from police, right? Police won't lay charges because they don't believe. They don't believe women, they don't believe us, and they don't believe, again, that intersectionality. If it's a Black woman who's reporting, if it's an Indigenous woman who's reporting, we're even less believed than white women. So the other factor is that police won't lay charges because when she does report, she's not believed. So she reports, they lay charges, but the charges that are laid don't reflect the gravity of the offense. And so what that means is oftentimes a woman is raped, she's sexually assaulted, but they will plead down from a serious assault to a minor assault because there's more likelihood of a conviction. So we don't want to bog down the criminal legal system with these cases. It's going to go on for weeks and it's expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the chances? What's going to increase the likelihood of success is if we plead down and he agrees to plead to a lesser charge. So she she's courageous, she reports, police believe her, lay charges, arrest him and lay charges, but then what he's charged with doesn't reflect the gravity of his offense. We also note the police started dual charging, which is when they show up at a house and he says she is the aggressor, the primary aggressor. She says he's the primary aggressor. The police officer is unable to determine who actually is the primary aggressor, even though she's standing there with a busted lip, bruises on her face. He will charge everybody to the police station, come on, and we'll sort it out afterwards. So when they dual arrest, when there is a dual charge, a dual arrest, and she is arrested, it means that the victim of the crime is now being labeled as the perpetrator of the crime, which is, again, another way that dissuades women and encourages perpetrators, men, to lay these frivolous accusations against their partners. So even if he is charged, what often happens, and we saw this in our court watch, is that the charges are often dropped altogether or dismissed. And there's a whole slew of reasons, lack of evidence, etc. But oftentimes the charges don't actually make it to a trial, right? So when you're charged and the charges are dismissed and he knows he did it and she knows he did it, what message is that sending? That the charges are dropped and the case is dismissed altogether. Oftentimes, if the charges are not dropped, the Crown will agree to proceed on, again, that lesser charge, right? So it's not the level of assault, it's a minor assault, because it's, again, the likelihood of success. And then even if he is convicted, there's a habitual breach of court orders, right? So he's told, there's a peace bond, he's told, do not go 500 meters anywhere near she works or where she lives, but he will show up. She will call the police. Police will, by the time the police come, he's gone, right? And even when they come and they see him there, the frivolity with which they, again, and I'm not making generalized statements because we have researched to back this up, there is no accountability for constant breaches of court orders. And so again, it just leaves him with this sense of superior understanding that the courts will not hold him accountable, and he can do anything that he wants to do, act with impunity, and not be accountable for it. So even, as I said, even if he does plead guilty and is convicted, the consequences that flow from that is a peace bond, which is basically, buddy, behave yourself. Conditional discharge, a house arrest. He's mandated into a partner assault response program, which is ridiculous. 12 weeks. 12 weeks. Think about this. For say a 45-year-old man who has been indoctrinated in misogynistic attitudes all his life, violence against women all his life, is then told to attend a 12-week program to readdress, to rebalance his opinions of women. 12 weeks is ludicrous. Nothing happens in 12 weeks. In fact, what we, again, part of our research has shown is that in those 12 weeks, he's mingling with other very accomplished abusers and perpetrators. And by the time he's done his 12 weeks, he actually comes out a much more savvy, much more sophisticated abuser, because he's exposed to other men who have shared their tactics on how to commit violence and to get away with it. There's no prison time and no accountability. And I'm going to stop for a second and talk about the prison, because I am an abolitionist. I'm an abolitionist, anti-carceral feminist, which means that I don't believe in the criminal legal system as the mechanism or the avenue to bring about transformation. I don't believe that the current system does any of that. What it does is it locks people up in little cells. It's dehumanizing, it's demoralizing, and it doesn't bring accountability. And from what we hear from many survivors, not all, many survivors are not looking for incarceration. They want accountability. They want him to understand that what he did was violent, the harm he caused, and to commit doing better, to doing differently, to being a kind of human being. But granted, there are individuals who are so far gone, and I hate saying this, but it is absolutely true. There are individuals who, they need to be separated from society, but not to be locked in a box. They need to be supported to understand, right, to help them to understand that the types of violence or the strategies that they use is not acceptable, and it isn't conducive to human life. And anyway, so it sends the wrong message. All of this sends a message. So the incremental liberties is that he tries it, it works for him, and so he'll try something a little bit harder, a little bit more, and more and more and more and more, until he is walking around through life, convinced that there is nothing anybody can do to hold him accountable, because there is nothing anybody has done to hold him accountable. And oftentimes it is left to the partner, women, to hold these perpetrators accountable. And here is our, I think this is our 2015 executive summary from our court watch called Still Unbalanced, and it's on our website. So when you have a minute, go download it. So I'm going to show you, I'm just going to preface this next slide, or these next input. I'm going to preface it by saying that this is a very full, by the end of this slide, it's going to be very, very full and very messy, for want of a better word, but it's messy because it's trying to represent all of the factors and issues that a survivor is dealing with on the daily, the average survivor is dealing with on the daily. And so I wanted to share with you what you should know about the lives of the average survivor who has multiple intersecting oppressions and experiences of violence. So get ready, here we go. So we're going to start with, we're going to call her Jane and her daughter Janet. I'm going to say that Jane has experienced physical violence. So she's experienced hits to the head, face, neck, including strangulation. And so is probably walking around with an undiagnosed brain injury. Again, part of the research that we've been doing with our community partners at Dr. Angela Colantonio at the University of Toronto's Acquired Brain Injury Lab is looking at brain injury experiences of women survivors of intimate partner violence. The brain injury that they sustained, traumatic brain injury that they sustained as a result of the physical violence perpetrated against them by their current or former spouse. So Jane has experienced hits to the head, face, and neck. And we know that these are the common areas that women who've experienced physical violence, these are the common areas that their abusive partners tend to target. So they'll hit, they'll punch, they'll kick, and it includes strangulation. We talked about coercive control earlier on. So verbal, emotional, psychological, financial abuse, social isolation from family, friends, and threats of violence. She's most likely experiencing sexual violence or threats to, or actual violence, threats to release sex tapes, online sexual harassment from him. If she has reported, then the criminal legal system is involved. And so she is now a witness to her own assaults, which is a bizarre thing, which we can talk about on another day. But she is a witness to her assault. So she's required to provide witness testimony. If she's working, she has to take time off. If she's in school, she has to take time off. It's crippling stress. I can tell you, as somebody who's been through this, it is debilitating stress. It's the trauma of reliving the violence, right? Because when you're testifying, you have to recall, and you're questioned by the defense as if you are the liar. You are a liar. You're the person that's making all this stuff up against this upstanding individual. So it's crippling trauma. And the act of retelling that incident and the violence of being cross-examined by defense is, again, women survivors have talked about experiencing criminal legal system and equating it to being raped again or to being beaten again. So that's the impact of the criminal legal system. If she has a child, as Jane does in this instance, she has to go through family court and deal with issues of custody, access, child and spousal support, equalization of their assets. Oftentimes, women are unrepresented parties because they've run out of money or they don't have enough money. They have too much money, so can't qualify for legal aid, but not enough money to hire a competent, informed lawyer. And a lot of these lawyers who operate in this space of family courts are uninformed about violence against women, gender-based violence, and the abusive tactics and dynamics that these individuals, men, play. And oftentimes women are also told, don't talk about the violence. Don't tell the judge that he beat you, because you're going to appear unfriendly. You're going to appear as if you're being spiteful and vindictive. So women are gagged, they're silenced into not telling the fullness of their experiences out of fear of being made to appear, spiteful, scorned, etc., which I don't agree with at all. And also going through family court, she served with endless motions by the other side. And the goddesses help you if he himself is self-represented, because he's using the family court and the systems as he's groomed them. They are accomplices to his violence against her. So oftentimes these men will report her to child welfare and say that she's an unfit mother, right? So child welfare becomes involved because Janet has witnessed the violence against her mother, and the child welfare, Children's Aid Society, and I'm not saying this in any defamatory way because it's the truth. A lot of Children's Aid Societies have been guilty of blaming women for the violence of their partners and blaming women for their children witnessing the violence against them, as opposed to holding the perpetrator accountable for it. Just mindful of the time. If she works, there are risks of her losing her job because he's harassing, he's calling her multiple times, he's threatened her and co-workers. There's an issue of lack of access to affordable housing. So, whether she goes into a shelter, shelters are over capacity and it's only a temporary respite. Family responsibility, FRO stands for Family Responsibility Office. So when he is refusing to pay the spousal support or the child support that he's mandated to, Family Responsibility Office is supposed to get involved. Then there's a day-to-day stresses of just mothering, right? Looking after the child, being loving and attentive to their homework, taking them to, their friends' parties, parent-teachers conferences, etc. Lack of access to counseling and supports, constant fear of their ex-partner, constant fear. Office of the Children's Lawyer being involved, because again, when the parents claims of parental alienation, when women are accused of alienating the child from the father, when women are just trying to protect their children, the accusation of parental alienation is levied against them. If they live in the rural versus urban communities, lack of access to transportation and supportive services. Talked about intersectionality. So if you're Black or Indigenous, the embedded anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that's there. What our wonderful colleague, Dr. Tokwe Adefarakan, our board co-chair, talks about, she frames it as people who are living on the margins of the margins. And then if she has the brain injury to lay on top of that, and how brain injuries impacts your long and short and mid-term memory and your abilities to recall, light sensitivity, etc., etc., etc. So you can see this is a lot. This is a lot. But I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges for survivors, and I call it the 6 S's. So the first S is shame. She feels shame feelings being brought on by societal pressure. The second S is stigma associated, the stigma associated with being a victim of violence. The third S is safety, fear of repercussions and other violence if she discloses. The fourth S is silence, either because she may have told and not been believed, or fear that if she tells, fear of the repercussions. The fifth S is solitude and isolation. So he deliberately dismantles all her social supports and networks, including removing her access to family and friends. And then the sixth S is how the violence against women, gender-based violence, is so siloed, where the sectors are disconnected from each other. I want to talk very quickly, because this is important, about misogyny being the hatred of women. And I'm sure most of you know that term. Misogyny. And in 2018, 2019, I was thinking about how do we disrupt misogyny, and recognize that we can't really disrupt something unless we name that thing, or unless we have a framework through which we are working to dismantle that thing. And so I coined the phrase, the word emulsiony, which is, it's a verb as well as a noun. And that verb is a framework that we're developing that will disrupt and counter misogyny systemically. So the verb is about love, like, trust, have faith and belief in women, girls, and gender diverse individuals. And it's manifested in different ways, such as physical, emotional, affection, support, and promotion. And the noun is that framework that we're developing to actually ingrain and institutionalize the uplifting of women, girls, and gender diverse people. And it's proactive and deliberate. So that's misogyny and emulsiony. And then there's misogynoir, which is the term coined by my other girl crush. As you can tell, I have many of them. My other girl crush, Dr. Moya Bailey. And that misogynoir is about women or people at the intersection of gender and race. So being Black and a woman, and how being Black and Black women and Black trans women and girls are erased from the discourse. And the same goes for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. But Dr. Moya Bailey was talking about Black women in this context, being Black and woman identified. And she coined the term misogynoir. And like my emulsiony, I coined the term emulsionoir, which again is about centering and disrupting misogynoir, the hatred of Black women, Black girls, and Black gender diverse individuals. And my team and I, we received some funding from the federal government, the first time ever in any country in this world that is actually working to advance gender equity for Black women, girls, and gender diverse peoples in the Canadian context. And I know some of my team are in the crowd, so shout out to them. And we're using this emulsionoir framework. So my question is, what do you think society can do better to prevent gender-based violence? So type away in the text, in the chat box, what do you think society can do better to prevent gender-based violence? And as you're talking, I just want to sort of move on to what my message is for these 16 days of activism. My message is about activism. It's about human rights. It's about disrupting the status quo to create a world that is built on love and kindness and compassion, because I genuinely believe it is possible. It's about reconstructing our narratives and reconstructing our experiences in a way that is more inclusive, more equitable. It's about everybody taking action, not just women, not just survivors. The burden shouldn't be on us, to those who are the oppressed, to end the oppression. Although we do the work because, as I said in my opening about my kids, we do the work because we don't want a world where our children are experiencing this type of violence, but we're expecting everybody to get involved and take action. It's embedded in the lived embodiment of social justice, right? A belief that everybody, regardless of your identity, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your religion, regardless of how much melanin or how little melanin you have in your skin, you have a right to be on this earth, because we are all children of this earth. It's about elimination and eradication. And I love the word eradicate because it comes from the Latin eradicare, which is about uprooting, pulling it from its roots, right? This is what we need to do in order to eliminate gender-based violence, is to get to the roots and the systems that actually perpetuate and allow it to continue, and being engaged. How do we build better? Actually, Alicia, can you read some of the comments as to what?
So some of the comments were, and this one is interesting, engage men and boys, also distribution of funds to education, more services, changing policies and legislations that impede women's ability to leave, believe survivors, listen and believe, of course, education, educating judges and lawyers. So, there seems to be a lot about education. And the last comment is destroying white supremacy, power thinking in our minds, families, community, and social structures.
Here for all of that, hence the hands, fist up, fist up, fist up. I love that because somebody said, engaging men and boys.
Yes.
That's my first one, some of opportunities to change the world. It is essential that men and boys get involved in this work. It is essential because women, as I said, are not the statistical, numerical perpetrators of this type of violence. It's men. And men and boys need to talk to other men and boys about their violence. It shouldn't be women holding them accountable. It should be other men holding them accountable. So it's a call to action to all men to get involved in this. We mustn't sit idly by, blinded to the suffering of others. We have to lead with empathy, and not just, empathy for people who we like and people who we can relate to, but empathy for people who are, as Dr. Tokoyado Farrakhan talks about, people on the margins of the margins who may not look like you, but who are suffering and, as I said, have a right to be here. And sitting idly by makes you complicit in the violence, makes you absolutely complicit. My team and I were on a 101 workshop last week with the amazing other new girl crush, Salem Debs. And she was given an analogy of, the conveyor belt in the airports that you stand and it pushes you, rolls you forward. She says, standing and being pushed forward is akin to, you're doing nothing. Disrupting is running against it. So running in the opposite direction. It's hard, but you need to do it in order to disrupt. And sitting idly by, to me, is akin to just standing whilst the conveyor belt moves you forward. You need to disrupt by running against that status quo. Everybody, whether you know it or not, you have some power. And it's about reflecting and recognizing that power and using it, whatever power and privilege you have, to speak up, speak out, and speak with, especially those living on the margins of the margins. Use your voice, use your power to speak up, speak out, and speak with. And then again, my team knows this, because this is, if I didn't believe in this, I wouldn't get out of bed, I wouldn't be doing this work, is understanding that we must always lead with love and kindness and compassion, because that is the way you feed yourself, you nourish your own soul, and that is the way you nourish the world, right? Is to lead with kindness and compassion, and actually embody it in all the work that you're doing. And then, as I said, implement the Emoji framework in all social planning. My last question is, what will you do in your family or your community to prevent gender-based violence, better support survivors, or hold those who cause harm accountable? So pick any one or all three and just answer in the chat box. What will you, this is your personal commitment. What's your call to action that you're going to do in order to make this world a better place, to end gender-based violence, to support those who've experienced it, and to hold those who have caused the harm accountable? What can you do? What will you do? not just for the 16 days, but 365 days of the year. Alicia, are people typing?
Yes, so the first comment is continue to engage in meaningful conversations with my family at the dinner table.
Beautiful.
It gets heated, but I'm also strong in my stance.
Love, whoever wrote that, I love you. You are my girl crush, or I don't know what gender you identify with, but you are my crush. I love that.
Second comment, be engaged even when speaking up is hard.
Excellent. Absolutely. That's the definition of courage. You're afraid, but you do it anyway.
The other comment, center survivors' voices always.
Excellent. Here, here. Well said. Absolutely. And so beyond the 16 days, my message is one of hope, of holding each other, of shared loss and collective remembrance, so that through community healing and action, we will stand a chance of ending gender-based violence together. I genuinely believe that. And I want to thank all of you for giving me the time to share my thoughts, so that hot air balloon disappear. And there goes the birds. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nneka, for your excellent and heartfelt presentation and for sharing your extensive knowledge and insights with us. If there are any other questions or comments, we would like to open the floor. So feel free to type in your question or comment in the chat, and we will submit a few for sharing. So we have thank yous, 2 thank yous, 3 thank yous. Okay, so the 6.
The 6 S's, yes.
Yes. Yes, okay.
Fanisha, yes, you may. And actually, Alicia, I will share the slides and you can distribute it amongst the people who signed up for the webinar. Absolutely fine. Sure.
And here's a question: how can people get involved with your organization?
Excellent question. We have a website, so you go to WomenatthecentrE.com. It's, as I said, it's by and for women, trans, gender diverse survivors of all forms of gender-based violence. You can register. There are 3 types of memberships. Membership is free. You can join as an advocacy member, a community member, or a member of our board of directors. So get involved, reach out. A bunch of my team, I love them. Well, they're all here. Nicole's here, Kelsey's here. Yeah, so just go to our website. Jess is here. Go to our website and look at the membership. And we also have volunteers who may not identify as survivors, but want to, again, use their skills and their expertise in some capacity to support. And you can also get involved by donating, because we are heavily dependent on funding and grants that takes a lot of time to apply for and is very, very limited. So if we can, make us a cause that you fundraise for is also a beautiful way to support. Oh, I see Diamond's put a link in there to our membership.
Yes, the link is there.
Thanks, Darlene. Questions? I have a question for everybody, not for my staff, obviously, for my team. How much of this was a surprise to people? How much of the stats that was shared, how much of the information was a surprise to people? Type in. None? Everybody knew it?
Yes, that's right. Not a surprise. Somebody had a hunch on stats or directionally, so confirms or is worse.
Somebody asked why the red lipstick. My team know this. I call my red lipstick war paint. I put it on when I'm going out. I see the work. It is a war, right? And Brian Vallee's actually wasn't because of him, but there is a war on women and gender diverse people. And so when I step out into this space, I put on my war paint, and you can't miss it, can you? You certainly can't miss it. This has been an absolute honor. And Alicia, thank you so very much for inviting me. Much gratitude.
Thank you very much. So before we close, there is a question.
Yep.
You said that you don't support incarceration. However, can you please speak to male abusers with narcissistic tendencies who will never be held accountable? Thank you very much for that question.
Beautiful question. And I'm glad you asked it, because we actually did, we were funded in 2017 to look at alternative models of justice for survivors of gender-based sexual violence. And through that work, we adapted a model based on transformative justice. And for those who don't know, transformative justice is a model that was created in the States primarily by Black women, Black women, trans women, disability activists, including Dr. Beth Ritchie. I was drawing a blank for a minute, and Mimi Kim. And so transformative justice is prefaced on the understanding that we don't throw people away. And it's premised on the understanding that, as I talked about the systems being racist, recognizing that these racist systems are not safe for Black men, Black women, Black people in the US, in the American context. And so transformative justice is a form of justice that is about community accountability, where the person that's caused harm is brought into space, into community, has supports that wraps him, and whilst holding him accountable, is also helping him unlearn and understand. I recognize that there are many individuals who are narcissistic and don't operate in the world in the way that the rest of us who have our empathy genes turned on. And for those individuals, that type of justice model, it won't work. It doesn't work. But I believe that the overwhelming majority of offenders, perpetrators, people who caused harm, they learned it. It's a learned behavior. And the fact that they learned it means that they can unlearn it. And so the model that we've created, and we're in the process of just beginning to pilot, is based on identifying those individuals who learned and can unlearn. Individuals who sort of were, I don't know, born into, I don't want to say born into it, but who seem to have gone so far on the other scheme that they have lost their empathy, their human connections. There needs to be a different system. There needs to be a completely different system, but one that doesn't dehumanize. Because if we lock people away in boxes, if we take away their humanity in that sense, then I think we are treading very dangerously close to that dehumanization, right? We're perpetuating the type of violence onto them, not to the same degree, but we are sort of on that path. So I've been thinking about alternative ways to address these individuals, but right now, I just know that the current system is not doing anything to help them heal, or to help them acknowledge, or to help hold them accountable. In fact, what it does is it just further entrenches them in their misogyny and misogynoir. But I am honestly open. Whoever asked the question is absolutely bloody brilliant. And I would love to have a conversation where we actually strategize and brainstorm about alternative models that will hold these narcissists accountable in more healing ways.
Okay, so here's another question, a comment. You mentioned that some survivors are also experiencing a brain injury due to the abuse. Could you speak to that a little bit more? Thanks.
Absolutely. So we're doing some incredible work with, as I said, Dr. Angela Colantonio out of University of Toronto's Acquired Brain Injury Lab. And the focus is on the understanding that when women experience physical violence in the context of their intimate partner relationships, that physical violence is most often directed at their head, face, and neck, and including strangulation. And so the work that we're doing is trying to, number one, raise awareness in the gender-based violence sector, who support women survivors generally, but are not aware of that brain injury component. So at the same time as we're raising awareness for the gender-based violence sector, we're also looking at raising awareness amongst the brain injury sector, so that they understand intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, so that the two siloed sectors can come together and better provide better supports for survivors at the intersection of brain injury and intimate partner violence. And it's been an incredible journey. We've been doing this for about 10 years now. And it's been an incredible journey because the funders and the systems are becoming more aware. And the more awareness that there is, the better supports that there can be to help women at that intersection, and the more funding that is being given. We just recently received funding from Public Health Agency of Canada to develop and pilot programs at that intersection of traumatic brain injury and intimate partner violence. And we're working with a whole bunch of community partners, across Canada and in the US. I'm so sorry, my click. Can somebody tell the team to stop messaging on click because it keeps clicking up?
Oh, okay. Okay, well, so I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. So on behalf of Vaughan Public Libraries, Nneka, I would like to again thank you for joining us tonight, and thanks to all of you for taking the time to participate in this presentation. We really, really appreciated it. So our next session will be in January, and we will be doing a topic on autism. So hopefully participants can join. So in January and February. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.